What's up, everybody? It's time for another Potato Masher review. Today, I'll be comparing Tom Clancy's The Division on the Potato Masher and the PS4. If you aren't familiar with the Potato Masher, it's a $375 PC custom built in 2014 and designed to compete with the PS4 for the rest of its life cycle. The goal is not to pick on consoles, but to show that PC gaming can be just as good or better for the same money. The project was started by the Casual Shenanigans Gaming podcast, so go check us out using the link on screen. You can support the Potato Masher project and my channel by tossing me a few bucks on Patreon, where you can also see all Potato Masher reviews a few days early. This lets me test new games quicker and better, and I really appreciate everyone who's supporting me already. I've been recording games like crazy lately, and there are currently 4 games recorded and ready to edit, and a new type of Potato Masher series in the works with 3 additional games partially recorded. Suffice it to say, the spring is going to be really busy. Alright, let's get to it. The Division is possibly the second most difficult game I've reviewed on the Potato Masher, behind Grand Theft Auto 5. A dizzying array of visual options, new graphics technologies with obtuse names, and both weather and day and night cycles make a game that is both varied and at times actually pretty gorgeous. In these comparison shots, you'll see slight variations in time of day or weather conditions. I matched them as close as possible, but if you notice a small difference, that's likely why. One of the first things I discovered was I didn't like the preset graphics levels that the game includes. I felt like certain features were pushed too high and other settings like anisotropic filtering were too low. I started from the high preset and did some customization. I disabled vignetting and chromatic aberration as they don't affect the performance and I don't particularly care for them. The default high setting for ambient occlusion was fine, but I prefer NVIDIA's HBAO Plus setting when possible, so I turned that up. To compensate for the added performance hit, I reduced particle quality to medium and turned off subsurface scattering. I felt like these effects were not noticeable enough in-game to warrant the extra needed performance. If you want to see the exact settings I used at 1080p, there's a link in the description of this video. I'm going to call my final settings high, because they are very close to high while not maxing everything out. Some settings are maxed, and a few are on medium. With these settings, the game was very stable at 30 FPS. During large explosions, I saw a handful of drops to 29 FPS, but that's about it. And that's a handful of drops over 5 hours of recorded footage, so I was pretty happy with this. The most visually demanding missions I've played so far are the Hudson Refugee Camp and the Napalm Factory. I used these to verify that the game was stable. Both the PS4 and the Potato Masher experienced a few more drops in the Napalm Factory than anywhere else in the game so far, so I've chalked that up to an aberration based on the insane amount of fire in that mission. When I started reviewing the footage, I was surprised how closely my custom graphics settings match the PS4. This may very well be the first game that looks almost identical on the Potato Masher and PS4 with no large graphical issues. Let's look at some comparison shots. Here, while there are a few different shadows on the PS4 due to a slightly different time of day, you can see that almost everything looks identical except for the chromatic aberration being on in this shot on the PS4, which I immediately disabled. Here you can see the HBAO Plus on the PC version, but it was sunny on the PS4, so it's really hard to tell. And then I go back to the PC, there's the soft shadows, and then back to the PS4, it's now overcast and the shadows look quite a bit flatter. But the HBAO Plus is visible there. Here, I think both versions look almost identical. The PS4 might have slightly deeper shadows, but the Potato Masher has better ambient occlusion and slightly higher resolution reflections. Here, take a look at the shadow that's about to start crossing the screen, besides the better ambient occlusion on the character. Right here, you'll see that shadow line moving. Now, when it switches to the PS4 footage, it's updating at a lower refresh rate, probably 15 FPS, and the shadow itself appears to be quite a bit lower resolution, which makes sense because the Potato Masher is running on the highest shadow resolution. You can see the exact same thing here again, same shadow actually. On the PC, it looks quite a bit better. Lastly, you can see that the anisotropic filtering appears to be a little bit higher on the Potato Masher because the ground textures at angles appear to be a little bit sharper. The two versions are very similar. As nice as HBAO Plus is, I'm curious if it is the reason that the shadows might not be as deep on the Potato Masher. It's possible that they're just softer and more accurate, but don't appear to have the depth. Similarly, it's odd that the PS4 has lower resolution shadows but seemingly more dramatic lighting. Some or all of these differences could be due to slightly different weather and times of day. Both versions have noticeable pop-in, but the PS4 appears to be slightly worse. The Potato Masher's reflections look slightly superior in still comparisons, but the difference isn't very noticeable during gameplay. My personal gaming rig looks quite a bit better than either the Potato Masher or the PS4, but it takes at least double the rendering power for the Division to look unquestionably superior on the PC. While the game doesn't have any large instability issues, I do think that PC optimization could be better and that the PS4 version is very well optimized. Combat, level traversal, and all types of action benefit from higher frame rates. As hard as the GPU got hammered at 30 FPS, I knew that 60 FPS at 1080p was very unlikely. Sure enough, at very low settings, the in-game benchmark slowed down constantly. The frame rate was as low as 45 several times. That's not a terrible frame rate, but very low settings feature tons of pop-in and other rough edges that make the game look pretty bad in my opinion. At 900p, the benchmark ran very well at 60 FPS, but it was also at very low settings. To turn the settings back up, I had to drop the resolution to 720p. I really don't like playing at such a low resolution, but to the game's credit, it still looks decent. At the same high settings I used for 1080p 30 FPS, the frame rate dropped into the 30s and 40s occasionally. I dropped to the game's medium preset, and the frame rate was now stable. I love high frame rates, but if I was going to play through this game on the Potato Masher, I would choose 1080p 30 FPS. The GTX 760 simply doesn't have enough power to push the game any higher without significant compromises. Based on the Potato Masher's 1080p performance, I was hopeful that 1440p on low or very low settings would be possible, and it is, on low. Pop-in, shadow resolution, and lighting all take noticeable hits, but the game is still very playable. There were a few frame rate drops into the high 20s, but dropping the settings more to compensate would introduce unacceptable shadows and object pop-in in my opinion. The Potato Masher can handle 1440p, but just barely. 4K is not an option as you'd expect. The Division's art style is beautiful, and both platforms have a richly rendered world that is one of the best of this console generation. At 4K, I'd place it alongside The Witcher 3 and GTA 5 as examples of open-world games that push the bar visually. On the Potato Masher and PS4, it's less impressive, but still quite good. I'm disappointed that 60 FPS and good performance at higher resolutions were out of reach this time, but the Potato Masher handily matched the PS4, and that's the whole idea. If you enjoyed this video, check out the original build video or any of the other Potato Masher videos linked on screen. You can also follow me on Twitter, check out the Casual Shenanigans Gaming podcast, or support the project on Patreon. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.